to do a bit of a different video today because I want to start doing a series of videos that just explain some other things. I'm really enjoying doing the gun reviews, and that's going to continue, but as I've been doing them, I'm aware that I'm using certain terms that if you're unfamiliar with, you might not know what I'm going on about. So this is really not for the already initiated, but these are for people who are perhaps new to collecting these things, or maybe you've just got one, or maybe you're just interested in watching the videos. Maybe you don't even own one of these air pistols, but you're just interested in how they work and stuff. I don't own any regular firearms, but I'm interested in watching those sorts of videos that you see, just because I like the things. So I thought I'd do this so that people were clear on some of the terminology that I'm using. And this particular video, I'm going to talk about action types. So is it single action or is it double action pistol? And it's the sort of thing that I've heard myself saying over and over in the reviews, and then I thought, you know, some people might not know exactly what I mean by that. So apologies again if you're all clued up and you know what I'm on about. But for those who aren't sure, this will help you probably kind of going forward. Probably kind of. That's not very convincing, is it? Never mind, stick with me. We'll get through it together. Okay, so we've got a couple of different pistols here on the table, both of which I've reviewed already. This is the Springfield Armory XDM. This is a 4.5mm BB shooter. This one is the Umarex S25, which is a revolver and is a pellet shooter. Neither of these guns are loaded with either ammunition or CO2. So I'll just talk about how these work. So this pistol here, let's start with this. No, let's not do that. Let's start with this one. Let's start with this one instead. I'll move this one out of the way. It's just freestyling now. Look. Okay, so this pistol is, as you can see, a revolver, and what you could say is that this is single or double action. Okay? Now, the confusion is this. This is, I will demonstrate now for you, this is double action. Okay? That I've just done there is double action. But it's easy to think, well, that's a single action. You've only carried out a single action. You pulled the trigger and the gun fired, or at least it would have done if it had been loaded. But what we mean by double action is we're talking about what the trigger does, and it's actually two stages to that action. So the first action kind of puts the hammer back to that position. The second action releases the hammer. And that's what we mean by double action. So the first action sends the hammer back, and the second action, when you follow through, releases the hammer. Yeah? Okay, so that's double action. It's a single action physically, you could argue, but in terms of the mechanism of the gun, it's carrying out two separate functions. One, sending the hammer back, and the other one, continuing the pull of the trigger and releasing the hammer. Double action. By contrast, if you were to manually cock the hammer yourself, you've done that yourself. You've cocked the hammer. So the trigger has only one action left to fulfill, namely releasing the hammer. Single action. Yeah? So double action, single action. So it's about how many actions the pistol itself has to perform rather than how much you're doing. The differences are on a double action that you can see where the trigger starts from there. So you're going to have a bit more weight on the trigger, or certainly a lot more travel on the trigger to bring it back. It's got to do more work to send that hammer back and then finish that movement by releasing the hammer there. So there's a lot more travel. Again, the difference is when you cock the hammer manually, you can see that first stage, the trigger has been kind of retracted back into that single action position, which means that you've got a lot less travel before the hammer will be released. It's a lot lighter trigger pull, and it's a lot more straightforward. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's probably easier to aim and keep the gun accurate because there's less movement required. You can kind of keep that steady and very little movement. Whereas if you happen to make that effort, you're possibly going to be a bit less accurate. So if you wanted to just fire off a few quick rounds, yeah, double action might be the way forward. If you want accuracy and an easier trigger pull, that's when you want to go single action. Yeah, but you go, oh, that's a lot of effort just to keep pulling that and I'm pushing the hammer back and it's got a release and it's quite a lot of effort. Surely there must be something that cocks the hammer for me after each time I pull the trigger so that I don't have to do that every time. Well, there is. This is the XDM, and similar to a Colt 1911 or any brand 1911, and in this case we're talking air pistols, so the 1911s that I've looked at were the SIG Spartan, I've looked at the Remington, Swiss Arms, and similar, very similar in function to this. I'll just put the, you can see there's no BBs in there, but this is a single action only pistol, semi-automatic. So what happens is you can't shoot it in double action. You can pull that trigger all you want and there's no hammer to send back or to release. So you cannot fire this in double action. Okay. What you would have to do for this pistol is cock it first, and I held down that slide catch release there so that it cocked. This gun's quite handy because it's got a little thing that juts out there that lets you know it's cocked and live. So now that's cocked, my only option then is to release the internal. This is what you call a striker fired pistol, so kind of that internal striker which carries out, or in this case releases the CO2 I suppose, and fires that BB. Yeah, so either way it's always going to be a single action pistol. And the beauty of these is every time you pull the trigger, that slide, using a bit of CO2 in this instance, it will send the slide back like that, engaging it once again, ready for you to pull the trigger again in single action. So because of the blowback function on this pistol, it gets it ready again, it cocks it. Every time you pull the trigger, the slide will slide back and it will cock the pistol ready for another single action shot on the trigger. Every time. So a lot more straightforward. It's a CO2 pistol at the end of the day, so there's not going to be a lot of recoil in a real world pistol. The action, as well as the force of the bullet being kind of released, it would send the gun back like that, so you'll get a bit of recoil. You know, on the real pistol, you get a bit of recoil, just as you would from a revolver. You know, the force of that bullet kind of exploding, if you will, would create a bit of recoil, the force of it. But because these are just CO2 powered air pistols, you're not really going to get that recoil here. Certainly from the revolver, when you fire that, you get that holding position and you fire that, there's not going to be any more recoil than that. It's purely, the only movement is going to be the movement of the pistol in your hand, if your hand isn't sturdy on it, or just the action of that, you know, and the weight of the pistol might give you a little bit of movement, but very, you know, nominal really. Conversely, with this is a blowback pistol, so it mimics the actions of a real gun. So when you pull the trigger, some of the CO2 goes to firing the ball bearing out of the pistol, and some of the CO2 goes to sending this slide back, replicating the actual action of a semi-automatic pistol. With that movement, a little bit of the weight is going to be distributed towards the back of the pistol, and you might get a little bit of a movement like that, and that's what feels so realistic in your hand. That's what feels so nice about it. So you're going to have to perhaps just, if you want to shoot accurately as you can with these, you're going to have to just make sure your back lined up before you take your next shot. Yeah. So it's going to move a little bit. I'm probably exaggerating here. You're not going to get that much movement from it, but maybe like that, you'll get a bit of a rock. Every time oh, there goes my camera. Speaking of rocking, every time that goes back, it's going to knock it up like that a little bit, just a tiny bit, not as much as I'm doing now. So you're only going to get, if you're shooting at targets or wanting to smash a bottle or put a hole through a can, you're going to have to just make sure you get back on target. If you've got a larger target, go for it. Just keep shooting, and you'll get a nice little spread of BBs. Always make sure you know what's behind your target, obviously, and make sure that you're properly protected, and so is the surrounding area. But that's basically the difference between single action and double action. For anybody who didn't already know that, I hope that's nice and clear for you. So double action, the gun does two things: sends the hammer back and then releases it. 1, 2, single, double. Yeah, and the single action is when the hammer's already back and you just release that hammer. Likewise with the semi-auto, you can't shoot this double action, it just won't do it. So it has to be cocked, and then your single action fires your ammunition out of the front of the pistol and hopefully towards its intended target. Thanks very much for your time. All the best. See you again.